Most people think that the IRS can wake up one morning and take their house. That's not how it works. In fact, I've seen people owe hundreds of thousands of dollars and keep their homes, while others lost everything. The difference comes down to a few decisions most people don't even realize they're making. Today, I'll show you exactly when the IRS can take a house, when they usually don't, and the warning signs you should never ignore. I'm Brad Paladini, a tax attorney and founder of Paladini Law. My team and I help individuals and business owners who owe the IRS protect their homes and resolve tax debt with clear, realistic plans they can actually afford. This is one of the biggest fears people have when they owe back taxes. They think, if I don't fix this immediately, I'm going to lose my home. The reality is much different. The IRS has the legal power to seize a home, but there is a long, structured process before that ever happens. And if you understand that process, you can almost always stop it long before it gets close. Before we get into the real cases, you need to understand the biggest point of confusion. Most people think that a tax lien means the IRS is about to take their house. That's not what a lien is. A lien is a legal claim that attaches to your property and secures the government's interest. Think of it like the IRS saying, if you sell this house, we get paid. A lien can affect your ability to refinance and limit financial flexibility, but it does not mean they're taking your house. A levy is different. That's enforcement. That's when the IRS actually starts taking assets. They may freeze bank accounts, garnish income, or levy certain financial accounts. The progression typically looks like this: lien, levy, in extreme cases, seizure. And most cases never get to that final step. Here's what surprises most people. The IRS cannot simply show up one day and take your primary residence. There are multiple layers of protection built into the process. Before the IRS can seize a primary residence, it generally must assess the tax, send notices, demand payment, issue a final notice of intent to levy, provide an opportunity for a collection due process hearing, explore reasonable collection alternatives, and then obtain court approval from a federal judge. That last step is critical. A judge has to approve a seizure of a primary residence. The IRS must typically demonstrate that you owe the tax, that collection efforts have failed, and that there are no better alternatives available. That is not a quick process. It takes time and usually involves multiple missed opportunities to resolve the issue. Let me show you a case where the IRS actually seized a home. Facts have been modified to protect confidentiality. This taxpayer was a business owner who owed well into six figures, but the debt itself wasn't what caused the seizure. The real problem was non-cooperation. They stopped filing. They stopped paying. They ignored repeated IRS notices. The IRS attempted to establish payment arrangements. They requested financial information. They filed liens. They repeatedly tried to move the case towards compliance. Nothing worked. Eventually, the IRS determined there were no meaningful voluntary options left. Because the taxpayer had substantial equity in the property and consistently refused to engage, the government sought court approval. The court approved the seizure. Notice the pattern: high debt, ability to pay, prolonged non-cooperation. It wasn't random. It was the final stage in a long escalation process. Now compare that to another taxpayer with a very similar level of debt. They also had years of unfiled returns. Penalties and interest were growing. IRS notices were escalating. But instead of ignoring the problem, they acted before enforcement reached the next stage. We first got the missing returns filed. Then we pulled IRS transcripts to understand the full picture. We analyzed what they could realistically afford and structured a resolution around their actual financial situation. Ultimately, we established an installment agreement that prevented levy action and stabilized the case before enforcement escalated further. No seizure, no forced sale of assets, same category of problem, completely different outcome. The difference wasn't luck. It was timing and strategy. This is an important point that often gets overlooked. The IRS did not actually want your house. Seizing and selling property is expensive, time-consuming, and legally complex. In most situations, the government would rather establish a payment plan, collect over time, and resolve the matter without going to court. Seizure is generally considered a last resort. It's what happens when every other path has failed. If you want to make sure your home never gets close to this situation, focus on these 5 things. First, stay filed. Even if you can't pay, filing returns keeps you compliant and can reduce certain penalties. Second, don't ignore notices. Every letter is part of a timeline, and early action preserves options. Third, engage before enforcement begins. The earlier you address the issue, the more flexibility you usually have. Fourth, be realistic about payment plans. Agreeing to something you can't actually afford often leads to default and further escalation. Fifth, get a strategy before acting. Whether you handle the issue yourself or get professional help, understand your options before making decisions. Every one of these steps helps keep collection alternatives available. The biggest mistake people make is assuming home seizure happens suddenly. It doesn't. It's usually the final step after a long chain of ignored opportunities. And that's actually good news because it means you often have far more control than you think. If you intervene early, or even moderately early, you can usually prevent the situation from reaching that point. If you've received IRS collection notices and you're unsure where you stand, getting clarity now is much easier than dealing with enforcement later. We offer consultations where we review your situation, assess potential risks, and help map out realistic strategy to protect your assets and resolve the issue. You can use the link below to schedule a consultation. And if you want clear, practical explanations of how IRS collection really works, subscribe to the channel. I post new videos every week so you know exactly what to expect and how to handle it.